guys, welcome back. This week we're going to be taking a look at some of my all-time favorite Super Nintendo games that are way better if you got a second or even a third player around. Because a lot of the time, playing a game with a friend can turn what the kids would call a mid-game into a pretty good time. Now, if you've wondered why I haven't really covered too many multiplayer-centric games on this channel, well, I guess the honest reason is that when you're a 40-something-year-old guy that makes YouTube videos in his free time, you don't have too many people to play games with. So I just generally go solo on most of these games. But this week I've enlisted the help of my brother to get some proper multiplayer footage. So don't ever say that I don't do anything for you guys. Anyway, let's get the multiplayer games going before my brother throws me out of his house with a series of games that actually introduced me to two-player co-op games. Contra III: The Alien Wars for the Super NES is the gold standard for co-op shooters on the Super Nintendo. If you ever wanted to know what my favorite game of all time is, it's Contra for the NES, so if you ever get that as a trivia question, now you know. Contra is not only the very first video game that I bought with my own money, but it was also the first game that I ever beat. Much to the irritation of my dad one day when I finally managed to take down Red Falcon and just went running through the apartment like an insane person while he was trying to take a nap. But even more so, Contra was the very first game that I played with someone else, together, at the same time. Co-op games were actually pretty rare back then, and the idea of playing a game with another person at the same time was wild to me. And me and my dad played a lot of Contra. And from then on out, any new Contra that came out, well, I needed to have it, because I just wanted to play it with my dad. And when the ads started hitting for Contra 3 for the brand new Super Nintendo, I may have pissed my pants a little bit. This was one of those Super NES games that I would read just about any gaming magazine that I could get a hold of, just to get a taste of any new previews of the game, or even a hint at the release date. And when the game finally did come out, well, I didn't actually have any money to get it. But I was more than happy enough to do a full running lunge for it when I saw it sitting at my video store. So I'm gonna sit down here with my brother and check out Contra 3 one more time to see if it's just as much fun to play these days as it was back then when I brought it home from the video store. Obviously, if you played a Contra game, then you know what to expect here, since this is essentially the NES Contra games on steroids. But the first thing you'll probably notice is just how much faster this game is compared to other Contra games. The NES games were always pretty action-packed, but you could never say that your character felt like they were much in a hurry to get anywhere. Contra 3, on the other hand, feels much faster and makes for a game that's much more chaotic overall, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you feel about it. Like how you can just kind of lose track in what's going on since there's just so much happening all the time in this game. The original Contra games never really felt like bullet hell style shooters on the NES, but Contra 3 definitely does at times thanks to just how much quicker it moves. The game does at least give you more than enough firepower to handle all that chaos with, though. Of course, you've got the iconic spread gun that every Contra game's required to have by law, but you even get a smattering of less cool guns like homing bullets, laser beams, and even a full-on flamethrower that would bring Ripley to her knees. And while the weapon selection isn't all that impressive, Contra 3 at least lets you have two of those weapon power-ups at the same time, so you can switch back and forth on the fly. And even if you die, then you get to keep the weapon that you didn't have equipped. So there's sort of a new strategy added to the game where you have to know when to use certain weapons and which ones to save as a backup in case your friend just happens to accidentally murder you. And if there's one Contra game that you need that friend around for, I think it's this one. The added mobility and even the Mode 7 stages all seem like they were designed with a second player in mind, instead of it just being a neat thing that a second player could play with you. There's sections like the tank in the first level where one player drives while the other has to stand on the back of it to take enemies out that the tank can't get to. And then there's the rails in Stage 3 that requires timing and precision from both players working together if you don't want one of you to end up falling off the bottom of the screen. And even the Mode 7 stages are all split screen, allowing both players to either attack the objectives together or just split up to get through the stage faster. It can be frustrating at times since the game is so fast that, like I said, you can easily lose your character in all this craziness, but it's just so damn rewarding to make it through each stage together that the co-op in this game just makes it for me. But for all the good that I can say about Contra 3, the fact remains that this game is just criminally short. Even playing through this one with my brother for this video, it took like less than half an hour to make it through. And that was still using a few continues and restarting some of the stages entirely. You can't even give Contra 3 the excuse of being an arcade port, since this one was made exclusively for the Super Nintendo. And as much as I still love this game, 6 stages just ain't enough. In fact, I think this is the shortest non-portable Contra game in the whole series, and it definitely feels like it since this one's over in like the blink of an eye. But besides that, I can't say too much bad about this one. Obviously, it's still an all-time classic, and one that's still just as crazy and fun to play now as it was back then. Plus, having another player around to make it through just elevates this game to legendary status for me. But I can say that this is actually my least favorite Contra game to play by myself. Yes, playing with another person does actually make the game harder, but the fun of learning how to make it through each section of a stage with your friend and not dying and then accomplishing that is just so satisfying. So grab a buddy and get out there and attack aggressively, because if there's one game on the Super Nintendo worth having one of those dudes around for, it's Contra 3. Sunset Riders for the Super Nintendo is one of those games that's pretty okay by yourself, but really shines if you got someone else around. Sunset Riders originally started out, like many Konami games, as an arcade game. I think this one actually hit arcades back around 1991, and it instantly stood out with its neat Saturday morning cartoon take on classic westerns. It took all the action that you'd expect from those movies and just tossed them into a chaotic 4-player arcade action game. And while I think it was popular enough, it always seemed to get overshadowed by Konami's other quarter crunchers at the time, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Simpsons. But, I mean, I always at least thought it was a really neat game, so when I saw this one hit the Super Nintendo a couple of years later, I was ready for some of that Konami Western action at home. But was Konami's home port of Sunset Riders just as good as their other arcade ports for the Super Nintendo? Or did they just want to put this horse out to pasture? Well, grab a tall glass of ice-cold sarsaparilla and let's check it out, Pilgrim. Jump into Sunset Riders and you instantly see the biggest downgrade from the arcade, since the Super Nintendo version is understandably only 2 players instead of the arcade's 4-player simultaneous action. But even with 2 players, this is still a ton of fun, and one of the few games on the Super Nintendo where I'd say you're missing out on a good chunk of that fun if you're just playing by yourself, since adding another player really makes each action scene feel like that much more of a classic Western shootout, with one of you taking cover somewhere while the other player blasts bad guys taking aim at them. Plus, all the little set pieces like running across a bunch of stampeding bulls and chasing down a stolen train on horseback is that much better when you got a friend sitting right next to you. And thankfully, having fun doesn't really take that much effort, since Sunset Riders is super easy to just jump into and start shooting up some desperados. Even though you don't get the 4-player simultaneous action of the arcade, you can still at least pick from all the characters that are in that version of the game. Steve and Billy are your classic Western gunslingers, each carrying revolvers that really don't seem like too much at first, but they can be upgraded to a multi-directional death gun with just a couple of power-ups. The other 2, Bob and everyone's favorite hot pink sombrero badass Cormano, carry around rifles and shotguns accordingly, though they're essentially the same gun, with both of them looking like you're just shooting a bunch of neon Ds at enemies. As mentioned, each character can collect power-ups that allows them to either shoot rapid fire or give them a second gun. And if you can manage to get both power-ups at the same time, then you are basically a walking Wild West Terminator. But try and keep your cool there, cowboy, because unlike the Terminator, one hit from any of these enemies will send you to the great beyond, taking all those nice power-ups with you. The levels are all your stereotypical Western movie locations, where if you've ever watched a Western, then you'll probably see something in this game that reminds you of it. Old dusty town shootouts, stolen train shootouts, bar shootouts, basically just a bunch of shootouts. And while the game isn't very long, the variety of the levels coupled with the game's incredible art style that Konami was famous for really keeps your attention here. As mentioned, the game literally looks like someone made a Saturday morning cartoon based on a Western movie, and hardly anyone was making Western anything when this game came out, so it really stood out as something different. Sunset Riders was always one of my favorite go-tos at the video store. Not only was it a rare video game based on Westerns, but probably my favorite 16-bit co-op game outside of Rolling Thunder 2 on the Genesis. I mean, it's just a fun game, especially for the people that found something like Contra III a little bit too intimidating. Sunset Riders' bright, colorful graphics and slower-paced gameplay was definitely a little bit more inviting for casuals, even to the point where my dad really liked this game because I think Contra III was a little bit too much for him. But even if you don't have a friend around to play with, I still think Sunset Riders is one of the best arcade shooters on the Super Nintendo. And if you somehow missed out on Konami's rootin' tootin' 16-bit shooter, well then slap some bacon on a biscuit and saddle up to this incredible Konami arcade port.
That was a bang.
Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo was the most fun that I ever had playing an RPG with another person. Now, I'm not going to get too in-depth with this game's systems or gameplay or anything like that since we'd be here all day. But let's just say that this was one of the best action RPGs that you can play on the Super Nintendo if just taken at face value. And maybe I'll save all of that for a future video because I really do love this game. But the thing that I wanted to focus on for this video is not only how much co-op adds to the game, but also how much it fixes it as well. Secret of Mana starts off as your typical single-player RPG. You run around the screen and smack enemies with your weapon of choice, but you can't keep just attacking over and over, since you need to let your action bar charge back up to 100% before you can actually do more damage. And yeah, you can just swing all you want, but you're not going to be doing any damage. Let the action bar charge back up and then swing again. I don't know why I've had to explain this to so many people. It seems like it should be obvious. You can also charge it up above 100% to use a more powerful attack, though you're slowed to a crawl while it charges. And if you're sitting there and saying, Jeremy, you literally just said you weren't going to explain game mechanics for this one. I get it, I know, but I needed to explain this so that you can understand why it makes it such a fun multiplayer game. Because after just a couple of hours of running around by yourself, you start to pick up companions that follow along with you and fight with you. And these companions are here even if you don't have anyone playing with you, but we'll get to why that's a problem here in a second. In the meantime though, if you got a friend or even two sitting around, they can pick up a controller and take control of one of the companions, giving them full control over not only their attacks, but also their items, armor, basically everything for that individual character. So if you're thinking the co-op in this game was more of a tossed-in gimmick, it is not. In fact, playing with other actual humans solves this game's biggest problem, and that being the AI has no idea how to play this game. If you let the computer control them, then you are at its mercy of whatever dumb things it's gonna do. Sometimes they'll attack an enemy, other times they won't. Sometimes they'll just get stuck in a corner and completely flip out. And yes, I am aware that you can kind of go into the options and change how aggressive or defensive you want them to be, but it really doesn't solve the main problem of just how bad the AI is at playing its own game. It really just seems like there's no consistency with it, no matter what you do, and you'll end up babysitting these companions far more than you'd like to. Get a friend or two to play with though, and all of that goes away and turns the game into a full-on multiplayer action game. Of course, the stuff that I mentioned before applies to your friends now, like waiting to do damage and charging up more powerful attacks. But when you've got friends playing, every fight turns into you all working together, as one person either uses items to heal or the other attacks while someone else is charging up for massive damage. It is so much more fun to play through Secret of Mana with a friend that it's almost criminal to me that so few people back in the day even realized that you could play this game with other people. It's literally one of the very few Super Nintendo multi-tap games out there, but I guess since it was an RPG, no one really cared. I cared though, and I'm glad I did, because Secret of Mana ended up being one of my favorite multiplayer games on the Super Nintendo. Even all these years later, it's kinda hard for me to play this game by myself, because I just know how much more fun this game is with other people. It's still a fun action RPG on its own, but if you can get some friends to play with you, then this game's just an absolute blast. Not only does it fix the game's worst issue of companion AI, but it turns a solid action RPG into one of the best on the system. So do whatever you have to do to get a couple of friends together for some Secret of Mana. I think you'll have fun with one of the Super Nintendo's best multiplayer games that not too many people have ever even played with another person. Knights of the Round for the Super Nintendo is the definition of a beat 'em up that you really need a friend around for. If you've watched any of my videos at all, then I'm pretty sure you gotta know by now that I love beat-em-ups, since I'm pretty sure I've got one in just about every one of these videos at this point. These were some of my favorite games to play back then, especially if they had a two-player option, and especially if they were from Capcom. And that's exactly what I got with Knights of the Round, a port of Capcom's arcade beat-em-up of the same name. Though I don't think there were too many kids back then that ever saw that arcade machine. I know I didn't anyway. So this was a nice surprise to see on my video store shelf, especially a month after playing a certain other Capcom fantasy brawler. Now, if you're thinking that you may have already seen me talk about this game before, well, you might be thinking about The King of Dragons, another fantasy-based brawler from Capcom that I've mentioned a few times on this channel because it's legit one of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo. Knights of the Round, though, came out just a month later, back in April of 1994, so this seemed like a lot of fantasy hacking and slashing from Capcom in just the span of a couple of months. But I mean, I wasn't arguing since I'd played just about any beat-em-up, even if they were just tedious as all hell. And unfortunately, Knights of the Round ended up being one of Capcom's more tedious brawlers. It's not bad, and it's got some neat gimmicks that we'll get into, but just coming off of the incredible King of Dragons, this one definitely feels like a step backwards. Gone are all the awesome characters and fun gear that made King of Dragons so much fun, replaced here with more of a standard beat-em-up formula that only has a few things keeping it from feeling super generic. Obviously, the game's based on the legends of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and you can select from Arthur, Lancelot, and Percival as your round table dudes that you want to play as. Unfortunately though, if you took that away, then this would probably just be Medieval Fantasy Brawler number 230 or something like that. There's actually nothing here that really makes this game feel like a King Arthur game beyond having those characters in it. And while I can't say that I'm some sort of King Arthur expert or anything like that, I do at least hope that a lot of those legends are more exciting than just wandering the countryside fighting the same three enemies over and over, which is what you'll be doing a lot in Knights of the Round. The game does at least have the leveling up feature that King of Dragons had, but even that seems kinda half-assed here. You have a certain amount of points that you need to hit before each level by either taking out enemies or just collecting treasure that's laying around on the ground. And once you level up, you'll get your health bar refilled and maybe some new armor and weapons to look at. But as far as I can tell, it just seems like it's all cosmetic. Your health bar never gets any longer, you never seem to do any more damage, and you don't even get new or improved attacks or powers or anything like that. It's literally just a free health bar refill, and you might look a little bit cooler in the process. This seemed like a huge step back compared to King of Dragons, where you could actually see and feel the benefits of your character leveling up. It's sad when the coolest feature that Knights of the Round has is being able to split up treasure and health by hacking at it so that the other player can pick it up as well. Oh, and you can also ride on a horse, and that's always a plus. Speaking of that other player, well, this is where they come in handy, since you desperately need that second player to get you past the tedium that Knights of the Round starts to hit after just a few stages. Some of the levels in this game just stretch on for way too long, and having a friend not only speeds up the gameplay considerably, but also lets you double team enemies with one of you in the front and the other in the back, letting you take down most enemies in just a few seconds. And yes, I am aware that you could probably say that about most beat-em-ups, but there's something about having a second player in Knights of the Round that really pushes this game past too tedious to play to something closer to, yeah, this is a pretty okay game. Knights of the Round feels more like something that would have launched with the Super Nintendo, not a game that released literally a month after the far superior King of Dragons. But I still have some good memories with this one, solely based on playing it with my cousin, making our way through the overly long stages, getting mad at each other because one of us took all the treasure, or just complaining to each other about how cheap some of the enemies are while we were both getting steamrolled. I can't deny that it added significantly to the enjoyment of this one. And apparently not a lot of people played this game back then, so if you've never heard of it yourself and you're a fan of Capcom beat-em-ups, then maybe check Knights of the Round out. It's not too bad, but it really shines if you got someone else that you can share the pain with, and maybe an alcoholic beverage or two to go with it. And that is gonna do it for this week because my brother only has so much patience being forced to play games with me to satisfy people on YouTube. But it was a good time, at least for me anyway. I really miss sitting around with my cousin back in the day and playing these games, since the first thing I'd usually look for on any Super Nintendo box was that if it had any sort of multiplayer. It sucked to do that whole passing the controller thing to take turns. So if any game offered some sort of co-op or versus mode, that usually meant that I'd rent it right on the spot. And I found a lot of games that I would normally never rent if it was just me playing them by myself. Of course, we had our go-tos like Street Fighter and Turtles in Time, but it was really fun to find a new game from just taking a chance on it due to it being a multiplayer game. But of course, I want to know what your favorite multiplayer games were back then, and if you preferred co-op or versus style games. And while you're doing that, do me a favor and give this video a like if it made you remember what it was like to play some of these with your friends. Or maybe even a sub if you want to see some more videos like this one. But that is gonna do it for me this week, guys. Check back next week for some more games to talk about. But until then, you're getting the crappy controller to play with.